rapid rebound in economic activity following the declines of financial years 24-25. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen. One, let me highlight the positive development of inflation being lowered firmly within the target range of 4 to 6%, with the expectation that Jamaicans will benefit from a stable and predictable rate of price increases over the next 2 years. Secondly, I also want to reaffirm Bank of Jamaica's commitment to achieving its primary mandate of price stability by maintaining inflation in the 4 to 6% corridor. And thirdly, foreign exchange market stability is a significant contributor to price stability, and the bank is equally committed to maintaining stability in the foreign exchange market. Thank you, and I will take your questions.
Thank you, Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for your questions. For the persons online, kindly use the raise your hand feature to be found at the bottom of your screen or send a message using the chat function. I ask that you remember to identify yourself and the organization that you represent. Al?
Good morning, Governor. As the year comes to a close and you reflect on 2024, you've made, and yourself and the team have made significant contributions, I would say, to both stability, and you sent the signal for growth in the economy. More particularly, if we think about the impact of beryl, we saw what happened in the States. You've reduced the policy rate by 75 basis points, I believe. That's really significant. Can you talk a little bit about that, and do you think that is being appreciated by the wider economy and actors in the economy?
Thank you, Al. It's been an interesting year, some good and some not so good. And obviously, Hurricane Beryl is not so good. But generally speaking, I think that things have trended in a direction that is positive for the country and for our objective of keeping inflation in the 4 to 6 corridor. 75 basis points out of 700, which is where we were before, is maybe not significant enough to start the ball rolling for some of the commercial banks. But we watch in keen anticipation that they will shortly respond. To say, to the extent that the data that comes in supports us lowering rates further, we will. And to the extent that there are no significant risks that we consider particularly dangerous to inflation, we will continue to reduce. So all of Jamaica can take that as a signal from the Bank of Jamaica. How far we go depends upon that incoming data and those circumstances that surround in the global economy, but also in the Jamaican economy.
Just following up, Governor, you could have taken the approach of wearing belt and braces and being so reticent in light of beryl, in light of the rains, in light of where the foreign exchange went and decided not to lower interest rates, but it was a risk. I think it's a risk that'll pay off. But in light of that risk, you sent the signal, but a lot of the commercial banks don't seem to be responding to the signal. What's your take on that?
As I said, Al, it's early, and I expect that they will. So let's see.
Very well.
We have a raised hand from Dashan Hendricks. Please go ahead. Okay, while we sort that out, we have a question from David Rose. The BOJ's ABM standards are set to go into force in 2025. Have you and the DTIs made any revisions or concessions with respect to the new standards?
All right, good morning. In relation to the ABM standards, we continue to work closely with the DTIs as they roll out their action plans that would see them bringing themselves into conformity with those standards. Several of them did ask for some extensions, given the impact that Hurricane Beryl had on their operations. I'm happy to say that most of them have recovered quite nicely. And in terms of their performance, their wider performance, we've seen improvements. And so our anticipation is that they will be able to, within the first quarter of next year, pull themselves into full compliance with those standards. In relation to concessions, I wouldn't say that there have been concessions. I think discussions are still underway. We're currently consulting with the industry in relation to the framework that the bank will use to evaluate the reasonableness of their ABM fees and charges. Those discussions continue. And in relation to some of the entity-specific issues, we continue to have those discussions with them to ensure that they land on their feet. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Lewis. Dashan's hand is still up.
Yeah, I can't. You hearing me now?
Yes, we are.
You hearing me now? Okay, cool. Thanks, Melanie. Governor, good morning. Just following up on Al's question, and in terms of monetary policy and the reduction in interest rates that we have been seeing over the last couple of meetings of the MPC, the Bank of Jamaica has said that most of the slowdown in the economy, not just the Bank of Jamaica, but also the PIOJ, has also said that most of the slowdown that we are seeing are forecast to see in the economy over the last half of this year, from June into the December quarter, is caused by Beryl. But before that, business people were saying that they were seeing and feeling slowdown in the economy. And from an objective perspective and looking back and seeing that we won't be having a soft landing that the Bank of Jamaica would have liked to have, because we're going to be having at least 2 quarters of contraction in the economy, did the Bank of Jamaica, seeing how our transmission mechanism works, did the Bank of Jamaica wait too long before you start to cut interest rates? And just from an objective point of view, not a criticism, just objectively, just looking back. And I have 3 more questions, and if you permit me, I'll just ask 1 more, and if you want, and if you would give me the privilege, I'll come back a little later and ask the other 2. The other one is from the presentation in terms of our trading partners, and in this case, I will say United States. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And the rhetoric from Donald Trump in terms of isolationism and mass deportation, and we have highlighted it as being something that could impact inflation in Jamaica and by extension impact your monetary policy decisions. Have you begun to look at models, forecast if what Mr. Trump says he will do if it happens, or it will impact you at all and your policies going forward?
Thanks. All right. Thanks, Governor. Thanks, Dashan. Morning. Let me go to the core part of your question, Dashan, whether or not we waited too long. And the answer is no. You preface your question on the fact that there's an expectation of 2 quarters of contraction. The PIOJ has projected a 2.8% contraction in the September quarter, and we do expect a small contraction in the December quarter. But bear in mind that that contraction is really due to the impact of Beryl. So that's just a short-term shock, and the economy will recover. No, I think we need to abstract from the impact of that shock, though. And when we step back, what we recognize is that, and recall that coming out of COVID, the economy really experienced a very strong recovery. Last year it was 2%, the year before it was 4.6%, and the year before it was 8%. So we're coming off the back of a very strong recovery. So what we're seeing now, really, if we just simply abstract from the burial impact, is really a normalization in growth rate. The economy's growth is really returning back to what we call its potential growth rate, which is really what the fundamentals of the economy can deliver in terms of economic growth. And also, if you can recall, Dashan, this is exactly what we said over a year ago would happen, that expect growth to normalize in the economy back to around the 1% to 2%. And that is outside of the burial impact, that is exactly what we're seeing happening. Having said that, though, I mean, we know that there are some sectors that we are keeping a close eye on. The construction sector, of course, that has continued to record some contractions, but again, that's on the back of very strong growth over the past couple of years. But we think that, in part, also reflects the impact of our monetary policy on demand and also on the flow of credit to that sector. So we're keeping a close eye on that. We know that tourism is slowing down. We had the impact of the travel advisory, we had the short-term impact of burial, but also we must again bear in mind that for tourism, last year was a very strong year for tourism, and so one would expect some normalization. Of course, what we see happening now in the global tourism market is a recovery in the demand for long-haul tourism. So that is also affecting our tourism demand. We're also looking carefully at what's happening in the retail sector, in the distribution sector, because we think that that is also reflecting the impact of, one, the high prices on people's real disposable income, as well as the impact of our monetary policy. So in short, Dashan, if we just abstract from the burial impact, what we're seeing is really a normalization of the growth pattern of the country.
In relation to the second question, which we are interpreting to mean, have we done any modeling on the impact of the potential policies that can be implemented or will be implemented in the US? The short answer is we've started preliminary work, Dashan, but clearly what has been announced to date cannot be seen as declarative policy directions that the government will take. So we are going to wait until we have more clarity about exactly what will be done before we can formalize our thoughts. However, our preliminary view have been informed by discussions that we have seen amongst other technicians in the global space. We are aware that there are plans, as you correctly put it, to implement tariffs on goods coming out of China and other countries. We're aware of a proposal to cut taxes. We're aware of a plan to undertake mass deportation. And finally, there are plans to increase U.S. oil supply. The impact of all of those policies have been assessed by international commentators. And we're aware that GDP estimates, the impact on GDP estimates range anywhere between 1% to 2% on the U.S. economy. When we take those into consideration, we also consider that inflation in the U.S. could rise, and where prices coming out of the U.S. are higher, then those will affect us here in Jamaica. Broadly speaking, these policies are likely to affect expectations. I think the governor spoke about that. But to the extent that Jamaican nationals are involved, the diaspora are affected, to the extent that these things happen, then remittance flows could be affected, and maybe other potential foreign exchange flows could be affected. But I just want to hasten to say that these are worst-case thought processes that we're going through. We have to wait until we see exactly what is feasible in the context of the U.S. administration for these things to be done, and then we will be able to more declaratively assess the impact on Jamaica and potentially communicate our thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have a question from David Rose. The FX rate was headed to 160 to 1. BOJ flushed the market with US 50 million on Thursday and 40 million on Friday. As a result, the weighted selling rate went down from 159.77 on November 19 to 157.96 on Friday, November 22. Governor Biles mentioned that the BOJ sold US 1 billion to the market via BFIXIT this year. Is this move to prevent the weighted average selling rate from being realized at 160? Is it a move to prevent secondary inflation expectations by the market? And also, while the BOJ FX rate has trended between 150 and 160 between 2020 and 2024, is there any thought that the BOJ will be less active in Q1 2025 when the economy is more stable after the burial shock?
Okay, thanks for that question, David. Well, first let me remind and emphasize that we are not trying to defend a particular rate. You mentioned the 160. We don't have a target for the exchange rate because we are operating, according to government policy, a floating exchange rate. So the exchange rate is going to move up and down. What we endeavor to do at all times is to ensure that those movements, either way, are stable, that they don't destabilize the market itself, such that you find that people start to hold back from trading in the market. And also they don't destabilize expectations, one about the exchange rate and also about inflation. So that is the framework and the policy framework that we operate in. So whenever you see we make an intervention, that is the objective that we're seeing. Of course, we note that there has been some pickup in recent months, and that's by and large due to the fact that for most of last year into early this year, dealers were actually very short. That means they were actually selling more foreign exchange than they were taking in. Since around June, July, Natalie, they have changed their posture a little bit, so they are not net selling as much as they would have been doing in last year. But just to also point out that the movement that we're seeing in the rates so far, it's not a concern for us because we are not seeing it as having any major or any threat to our inflation goal. The point-to-point movement so far is between 1% and 2%. So that is a fairly stable exchange rate. So we are not seeing any threat to inflation at this time. But we'll continue to watch and manage, as I had indicated earlier.
If I could just add, the foreign exchange market has a definite seasonality to it. And if you look on the year, you'll see the trends up and down. And if you look on several years, you will see similar up and down. And it has to do with inflows. There's a seasonality with that. It has to do with, let's say, tourism. There's a remittance kind of seasonality too. And it has to do with outflows, partly large invoices to be paid for oil, some of the other multinationals that pay dividends. Taxes, when taxes are to be paid, we find that there's a lot more inflow of foreign exchange than normal. So what we do in the market is try to even out that volatility. And as Wayne says, not actually target a range. But sometimes the rate goes pretty low and we are strong buyers. And sometimes the rate is trending very high and we are sellers. So we really are just in there to try to smooth the volatility somewhat, not to target any particular range.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have another question from Dashan. Please go ahead.
All right, I just put in my last two questions and finish. One is for Natalie Haynes, and one I just want to go on as reaction. One, Mrs. Haynes, is there a shortage in $1 and $5 coins in the system? And also, what's happening in terms of demand for notes? You notice if you go to the the ABMs to pull notes from time to time. You're getting more $5,000 notes. Sometimes you're not getting $500 notes, but it seems to be an overkill of $5,000 notes in the system right now. And to me, it feels like the couriers who are filling the machines are just putting the $5,000 notes in there for us to say that they fulfill the standards that the Bank of Jamaica has put out in terms of ABM and stuff like that. So what's happening there? We're definitely not getting $150 in the machines. You're hardly getting $500, and you're getting more. Even if you want change, somebody saying, "Not getting change, just be $5,000." So that's for Mrs. Haynes. And Governor, last week Tuesday, the Prime Minister announced where he wanted to. This is a bit more on the fiscal side, but it has a monetary impact as well. We want to incentivize the repatriation of businesses, including their activities, associated assets, and profits to Jamaica. I just want to get your thoughts on that, generally and from a monetary policy perspective.
All right. Good morning, Dashan. Good morning, all. All right. You asked about coins. There's no shortage of coins. We supply coins depending on what the commercial banks order from us. So there's no shortage of coins. 2, the banknotes. Yes, we have had actually complaints from the public regarding the large proliferation of 5,000 in the ABMs. And I think you're right. I think it's expediency on the part of the cash in transit in terms of not going so often to replenish the ABMs if you put high-value notes in there. Not all the ABMs have the 2,000 as yet. The banks are still working on that. But we are working with the banks and with Beryllium to say, do not put so many 5,000 because we are getting complaints. And the more complaints we get, we will push that back to the banks and Beryllium. There's no shortage of any denomination of banknotes. You probably won't see any 50 or 100s because based on the number of trays in the ABMs, they will put the high-value notes. 5, the 2s, that can take it, the 1,000 and the 500. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, but just a quick clarity. I was at a supermarket over the weekend, and a big sign was up in there. Due to the shortage of $1 and $5 coins in the system, you may not get accurate change in a supermarket.
Okay, so what I'm advised by the banks is that supermarkets that require, or any other retail business that require large values of coins, they need to pre-order those coins with the banks. Make an arrangement to say, I need X amount of $5 or $1 coins. What most retail persons are doing is sending their bearers to the counters to get it. And that's not how it is to be done. They are to call the personal banking section and place the order because they need large volumes. So that is the issue. So there's a disconnect between the retail and the banks. And we have asked the banks to indicate that to their large users of coins, their customers. So there's no shortage. Because when we get the calls from the retailers and we call the banks, we are told that they need, the retailers are aware that they need to place the orders separately and not just send on a given day a bearer to get it over the counter, because they won't get it at that time, because they won't have enough. All right?
Yes, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
On your second question, Dashan, yes, you're right. This is more a fiscal matter than a monetary. The fact is that, I guess historically, many Jamaicans have held assets abroad, and I would say in the old-time days, they did so primarily for reasons of security. They wanted to know that when they wanted their foreign currency asset, they could get it. I don't think that's the case so much today. I think pretty much everybody feels comfortable that the macroeconomic situation in Jamaica is such that they can keep assets here and be comfortable that they can have access to it whenever. It's been one of the great achievements in the kind of miracle that has occurred in the Jamaican economy in the last 10 to 12 years. There is also a tax side to it, or a tax incentive to keep it elsewhere. And as you probably are aware, not all the countries have the same tax rate. And so to the extent that there are countries with lower tax rates, it tend to attract funds there. So I presume that the Prime Minister is looking at this issue holistically and is sensing that comfort with being an investor in Jamaica is strong and good, and that maybe some tweaking of the tax program will allow some of those funds to come back to Jamaica. And I think that if we can swing that, it would be a positive thing for the country, no doubt.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Morning, Governor. Quick question, trying to gauge your thoughts. Pre-COVID, the BOJ went into a regime of interest rate reductions. You had reason to complain about the disparity with the reduction in interest rates and rates that the bank charges to customers. We are now going into another period of interest rate reductions, your second reduction now. Outside of moral suasion, Governor, what sort of tools you're looking at, if any at all, to ensure that your discomfort is not repeated in this bout of interest rate reduction?
Thank you. We take this matter very seriously because at the center of BOJ's objectives, in fact, its reason to exist as an inflation targeting central bank, is the efficacy of the monetary transmission system. And if that is inefficient, then we have a real problem. We have a problem that is front and center in the economy. So we have begun work on a central EKYC data bank. That is going to take us a little while. Dr. Lewis can speak about it a little more, or Dr. Robinson. That's going to take us a couple of years to get done. But what that will ultimately do is give consumers an easier way of porting their business around. Whether you're a depositor or you are a borrower, you can move more freely and easily amongst the banks. So while that is coming along, and that is good for a number of reasons, in helping in creating more competition, there are a number of benefits from it. But in the meanwhile, there are other methods that we're looking at, which I can't discuss at this morning, but I can assure you we take that bit of inefficiency very seriously, and it has to be remedied.
Two clarification for your jargon, EKYC. Pardon me, what is that? And right, just.
But you've been at all of our press briefings. You should be able to explain it to me. Electronic know your customer data.
Okay, thank you very much, Governor.
The kind of stuff that you and I as customers go to the bank and boy, we fill out form, driver's license, address, GPS bill, all that kind of stuff, to hold it centrally and hold it electronically so that it is portable right across all of the financial institutions.
Governor, I really want to get your thoughts on this, and probably putting you on the spot. You mentioned about foreign exchange and how well Jamaica has done over the last 10 to 12 years. Look at that vis-a-vis Trinidad. If you went to buy a KFC for $5, it may not be so finger-licking good. Can you talk about that?
I don't have any comments on Trinidad. Is that what a KFC cost you in Trinidad?
Their foreign exchange situation, you have to know this is absolutely awful. I'm just looking at the two economies and the way that's been managed, just your thoughts on that, basically.
It's an interesting question, Al, and I discuss it with our economists. In passing, several times it comes up, the different paths that several Caribbean countries have taken. Of all of the Caribbean, there are two countries that have pretty much gone the way Jamaica has, which is the DOMREP and ourselves. Everybody else has a fixed exchange rate. They don't fight inflation with interest rates. They tend to have significant subsidies in the economy. And Jamaica has taken a different approach, a kind of market-driven approach. I don't want to pass judgment on any other economy. What I would say is Jamaica has paid quite a price to be where it is. Let's not forget that. We've had a rough time with a depreciating currency. But today, we have reserves that are strong and large and allows us to intervene and to be an active participant in a free market where if you want to go and buy $5,000 to have a holiday, you can get it. And every Jamaican who has a bank account in US dollars can access that account at any time, instantly. So we have paid a heavy price and fought a long battle, but that is the victory that we currently have. And it is for other economies to decide what's the best path for them. I can't prescribe that.
Governor, just a follow-up question, not so much on that issue, but last year getting money out of the ABMs, particularly over the festive season, was god-awful, horrible. How do you see this particular Christmas season? Do you see that being addressed?
Well, GDA will respond to say that they have begun to adhere to the standards, so we expect to see that. And remember, last year, it was just only like about 6 months after the issuance of the new polymer notes, right? And so there were still some challenges in terms of retrofitting ABMs. Now, 1 year later, over 1 year later since the issuance, those matters have been resolved. So the only issues would be, as people are complaining about the preponderance of 5,000 banknotes.
Just a rider to Al's question. There is still a problem with the ABM downtime. I had that experience on Saturday and sometime before. I know that you are crafting regulations to address that, but it seems like the banks are awaiting the imposition of those regulations to do anything about it.
Well, if I might jump in, so the standards won't give you a world where at no time you will not have an ABM that's out of service. What the standards, when fully implemented, regulations are not, it will give a certain outcome on average. So recall that the standards say that 90% of all ABMs owned by a DTI should be operational. That's 90%. So that means that 10% at any given month will not be or may not be operational. Right now, the banks are operating at 94%. We think that's pretty good. Let's see if they can bring that up to 96. But it does mean that at every given month, you would have 4 or 5% that will not be operational. In terms of the uptimes, meaning the time that it takes how often you expect machines to be operational, banks haven't reached the standard as yet. That's 95%. They're currently operating at around 89 to 90. So there's still room for improvement there. So the uptimes need to be improved. And then finally, the measure in terms of recovery time, we have noticed that that recovery time has fallen from about maybe 6 hours to about 3 hours overall for the system, and that's heading in the right direction. It's still not at the 1 hour for urban, and it's at the 3 hours for rural. So the sector is heading in the right direction. I think during the Christmas time, the seasonality or the seasonal increase in demand for currency would suggest that the banks will need to stock up additional funds for the increased demand for cash that's expected during that season, and be working very closely with those entities to ensure that they're prepared. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Lewis. We have a question from David Rose. Was the reduction in remittance receipts, reduction in tourism activity, and a higher de minimis moving from 50 to 100 US responsible for greater depreciation in the US to JM dollar FX rate year to date?
No, I don't think we can reduce it to just those issues. There are a plethora of issues that come together to determine the flows, not the least of which, as I spoke about earlier, is the whole seasonality. You watch coming up to December, you're going to see people have to pay taxes end of a quarter. Foreign exchange gets sold, the rate tends to soften. Again, you see that at the end of the fiscal year in March, that same trend. You get middle of December going into March next year, tourism flows, the market is pumped up. So the seasonality really is a reflection of many different issues, but the fundamental ones that drive it are the sources of income from tourism, as well as people paying large, lumpy invoices and taxes to be paid.
Thank you, Governor.
Governor, the FHC regime, financial holding company, I know the law was passed and the regime is coming into place. Banks have a certain deadline within which to organize themselves in compliance with the law. Can you share with us the latest update? I know that some have got no objections from the BOJ. Can you share how many applications are before you for no objection? And in terms of sector-wide, how prepared or how much of the sector are now under the new FHC regime? And share those who are out.
Yeah, so Dr. Lewis will speak to that.
All right, thank you very much. Well, most of this is publicly available information. In our jurisdiction, well, first of all, you mentioned the law. The law was passed in 2019 for financial holding company licensing regime, which basically means that once you are part of a financial group and that financial group contained a bank, you're required to apply for a financial holding company license. From our assessment, there are 8 entities or groups that would fall under the regime based on their registration with the Companies Office. Of that 8, we have licensed 7. Could go through the list if you're good. Okay, so NCB, Financial Holding Company, Scotia Group, Sagicor Group. We have JNFG, VMFG, Grace Kennedy Financial Group. I think I've gone 7. And then JMB Financial Group. Thank you, Governor. So we have 1 application that's before us that's being evaluated. It's far advanced, so we will be having a look at it to see if it meets all our conditions for licensing. Yeah, this is Cornerstone Financial Holding Company.
Governor, can I just ask you, are you a little bit perturbed in any way about the fall off in tourism receipts and remittances? What are you seeing there?
Yes, of course, we are concerned, but to look behind and to see what are the reasons in respect to tourism, I think they're quite understandable. And it means that we just have to work a little harder to bring the tourists here. With remittances, I'm not sure whether Robert or Natalie have a better idea of what's happening there.
All right, so the latest data that we have is, official data is August. And what we're seeing here for this year, for August 2024, remittances are, well, net remittances. Let me look at the inflows. Inflows are about 16 million, 10 million above where it was last August. When we look at the net, that is the inflows, net of the outflows, it is around the same because the outflows are marginal and almost unchanged. Looking at the year-to-date now, remittance flows are slightly, I would say slightly lower, but mainly basically flat. So still performing well. And of course, the flows here are above, continue to be above where we were prior to COVID.
Do you think that's largely due to inflationary impacts in sort of in diaspora countries, US, UK, Canada? Do you attribute that to that perhaps?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, remittance flows are for a variety of reasons, so it just depends on what is going on here. Yeah. Mainly, of course, to fund expenditure, various expenditures.
Thank you, Mrs. Haynes. Another question from David Rose. BOJ has been trying to encourage greater financial inclusion over the last couple of years through simplified due diligence, JAMDEX, and risk-based KYC. However, there appears to be an education hurdle in the market as merchants are pushing back at tap-to-pay with mobile phones. How does BOJ think it can work with DTIs to improve expectations by merchants around the concerns regarding security of the different payment methods?
All right, Melanie, just repeat there was a preamble before. Just repeat the question for me.
Okay. How does BOJ think it can work with DTIs to improve expectations by merchants regarding their concerns about the security of different payment methods?
Well, I don't know if merchants per se have a concern regarding security. I would say it's the wider public may have a concern regarding hacking and so. And so any electronic payment that comes into the bank's sandbox to be tested has to satisfy minimum standards in terms of security. Again, cybersecurity, we require a third-party independent assessment of that product, so it has to meet minimum standards and assure us of the security there. Whether it be, I mean, they spoke about payments, so it can be debit card, credit card, e-money. I mean, I'm sure on Ishide's side, in terms of the credit card facilities and so, those are protected in terms of the minimum standards for, again, cybersecurity risks.
Thanks, Mrs. Haynes.
Can I just follow up on that? You know that you're aware of the situation with Uber and NCB. It's a complete nightmare. How do you address a situation like that? You have university kids who are just facing bills of 700 grand because it's not computed properly. It's an absolute nightmare. How do you address those situations?
Well, the full details, NCB and Uber has been very quiet, but my understanding, Al, is not computing error. It's just that these transactions were taking place over a long period of time without payments, or if they did payments, it actually was returned to their card. So time has come now to collect on a service that you got already. So I'm not understanding what is the concern here. No, help me, Al, because if you, and I hear that some persons were also capitalizing on the fact that payments were not being deducted from their accounts for these services and then started having a offshoot business in terms of giving the services to other persons, collecting the funds, knowing that they were not being, their accounts were not being debited. So I'm not understanding the full issue here.
Well, we are moving to more digital transactions.
Yes.
And what I'm trying to say here is you want to try and mitigate against skullduggery, theft,
Right.
smart Alex.
Right.
And how do you best
But
do that?
NCB in this case, and remember the service is provided by Uber. NCB, it's the gateway, the path in terms of moving from person's account, right? So NCB is a mere banker in this regard. So if Uber was not pushing the payments through NCB and decided, no, oh, I'm ready now to collect on these services, I think people ought to be pay for what they use. I mean, that's Natalie Haynes' view.
Yeah, if I may jump in as well, though, to the
Yeah.
extent that customers may have found that they were charged for services that they didn't use, or to the extent that they were overcharged for services that they did use, I mean, I just want to remind members of the public that they can reach out to the entity, in this case it would be NCBFG, through their complaints handling framework. If they are finding that they're not getting through, they can write to the central bank. We have an email address, customer.complaints@boj.org.jm. That's a recourse that you take after having engaged with the entity. You let us know what the specific case is. If the issue is, as Natalie is posting or proposing, then there'll be not much that the central bank could do. But as I said, if it's mischarging or overcharging, those are things that we could require the entity to investigate further and make the necessary refunds. And we have received a few of those complaints, which we have taken on.
And may I just add that type of issue is not a cyber risk. That's not somebody, that's just one company may not be, their systems may not have been operating efficiently to either push the payments on time or, as GDA say, overpayment for services already used. So that's not a cyber risk issue in terms of security of a system.
Governor, back to the interest rate and the banks. Your word is that caution, we are watching you and we'll take action where necessary. Would you share that thought?
In respect of the transmission system, yeah, we're absolutely determined that we have to have a much more efficient transmission system. Yeah. Not just watching them, yes, of course, but also we are working on methods to improve that system, for sure.
We have a question from Andrew Laidley. With the holiday shopping season around the corner, is BOJ planning to increase liquidity in the market to facilitate the additional spending? How much is the bank planning to pump into the financial system for the season? What impact will the holiday demand likely have on inflation?
Yes. Yeah. I think you're referring to the demand for cash in the system. And of course, that will depend. We get that signal from the banks in terms of whatever cash they will need. We're not yet at the position where we're going to give what we expect should happen in another couple of weeks. We release our forecast of what will happen for the demand for cash over the period.
Thanks, Dr. Robinson. We have several questions from David Rose. Number one, we recently heard that the SRR was promulgated in the Senate. Are there any updates on Basel III, Twin Peaks, and other legislation being drafted for Parliament based on your concern of the lag in getting legislation approved?
Well, with respect to Twin Peaks, we are still hopeful that it can get to cabinet before they break for the Christmas. I'm hopeful. So it's ready. It's just a matter of getting it there. SRR, well, that is in the Senate. And I presume that at the first opportunity that the Senate and the House has, they will begin discussing it. Basel III.
So the Basel III is something that we're still working on in terms of the recommendations for drafting instructions. Once those are complete, those will go through the requisite process, including being sent over to CPC, etc. So that work is still, I would largely describe as being in-house at this point.
Thank you. Next question. While market and consumer conduct will take time to be further refined, will BOJ be further inviting public feedback on proposed changes to improve their experiences? An example being the recent ABM standards, which came after complaints for years. Consumers want change.
Yes, so our big effort in that respect is via Twin Peaks to make the FSC into an organization that can really champion market conduct and customer protection in a modern, professional manner. Now, that's going to take a little while to build out legislatively. But in the meanwhile, we are seeking to build the capacity of the FSC to be able to handle, given the current legislative strictures and foundation, what they can do to improve the customer service. And the ABM situation is an example of that. To the extent that we see other burning issues, we will be seeking to address it prior to legislation by means of moral suasion. If we don't have the laws, we have to rely on moral suasion. But we rather seek to get that done than to leave it undone totally until we get the law. So we're going to try and do our best in the meanwhile.
Thank you, Governor. The next question from David. While BOJ is now pushing for SRR, why did the FSC never set up a compensation fund? This query comes in consideration that the JDIC and SRR will further protect bank customers, but not clients in the non-banking sector.
I can't answer entirely for the FSC, and especially at this BOJ press briefing.
Understood. Thank you, Governor. Go ahead, Al.
Governor, can you give us a little insight into the announcement that you'll be moving, I think, some of your back-end operations up near Hope Road? I mean, French Embassy, yeah. I mean, I thought the rationale behind it made perfectly good sense. I don't think a lot of people really took to that, but it made a lot of sense. I think in view of climate change, low-lying lands, just where you're situated, I mean, you know, to preserve those records. But from an operational point of view, how do you see that going forward? For years, we know the central bank down there at Neversole Place, literally the central bank, everything centralized. So yeah, you're going to have operations in new locations. How do you see that?
Yeah, well, I would say, you know, in the last 2 years in particular, this risk of the impact of earthquake or storm surge has come home to us in a very acute manner. And we have said to ourselves we have to make preparations for it. Where we are now is not adequate in many respects. And so we started to hunt for a solution. I'm going to ask George, who is in charge of that aspect of our business, to speak to the specific location that we have chosen and some of the reasons why we did choose that one.
All right, thank you, Governor. Yes, Mr. Edwards, good question. We have to have an effective set of arrangements to deal with business continuity. And as the Governor pointed out, we do have another location. That location is in a very congested area. Reportedly, it's on the very same fault line as Nether Soul Place, which is the center of our operations, our primary location. In addition, very limited parking space on the land. We have to rent additional parking space for that location. And most importantly, it can't accommodate currency operations. And in terms of the mission critical functions of the bank, currency, we spent a lot of time actually today talking about availability of coins and ABMs. And we have to, if this location is not accessible, we have to really be able, I think, as a modern central bank, a world-leading central bank, we have to be able to do our own currency operations and not be dependent on a third party. So you're right. The location, Hillcrest, checked a lot of boxes. It's not on the same fault line as Nether Soul Place. Close proximity to important services that we need, hospitals, police, telecommunications, various points of entry, exit, or other location. If we didn't have that rented parking space, there'd be one point of entry and exit, and then the footprint of the land just can't accommodate currency, as I mentioned. So this is far superior. There's some development work that has to be done. The hope is that we'll have a center that supports, enhances operational resilience of the central bank.
And I could add, it has more than adequate parking and an existing building, over 11,000 square feet, which is fine for us to house what we want. So it's not just the land we bought, it's a building.
Could I ask, Governor, the current tenant, the Attorney General's department, how long have you given them to vacate the property, and how soon do you intend to set up office?
Yeah, my understanding is that there is structure, offices that have been built, they just need to be finished to be able to accommodate their staff. And that I expect is going to occur in the early part of next year. They're obviously a very important partner of the bank, as our DGGC will tell you. And I think Dr. Lewis and DG Haynes. So we're not going to put them on the street, if you're worried about that. And in any event, as I said, there's development work that has to be done. And so it will take time to develop those plans. And then to actually, do what construction is.
So when will you begin those operations in that location?
Well, Bank of Jamaica is subject to Government of Jamaica procurement guidelines, referencing the work that we're going to do at Nether Soul, the expansion work. We went through a process of procuring the services professionals who will help us in pre-construction and post-construction activities, where we're going to be doing taking a similar approach. And so there are those steps that we have to go through, and then obviously, once we get a professional on board, we'll have very detailed plans, and then we'll be able to come back to you to say, you know, what's the projected timeline.
Could you share what?
In terms of for
Sorry, I was asking the costing.
All right, so we would only have received approval from Cabinet last week in relation to Nethersoul Place. We don't have any submissions that have been prepared and gone through the process for the Hillcrest property. But the magnitude of work done at Nethersoul, well, to be done at Nethersoul, is going to be very different from BCC. So I couldn't give you the BCC at Hillcrest number today.
So can you share with us then what's the capital outlay for the development that is to take place at Nethersoul Place?
Outlay for the development or for the professional services? Because I couldn't give you until we
give me the cost that you can speak to.
Well, the point I made is that there's been no spend because we just got an approval from Cabinet for submission.
Yes.
And outlay sounds like you're questioning how much we have spent.
It's Nethersoul
I'm questioning your budget for the capital works being undertaken at the former French Embassy and Nethersoul Place.
Estimated.
All right. So the consultant that we have secured, that cost is at 420 million Jamaican dollars. For the Hillcrest development, as I said, we are not yet at that stage. Where we are now with Nethersoul is far further advanced than for Hillcrest. All right, so what we will spend in the end depends upon the actual design, and that's one of the things that the consultant is going to assist us with. So I can't even give you a ballpark. And so it depends on what we're going to use the facility for, bearing in mind that the bank over the years has seen its mandate expanded. And we're in the middle of expansions just now. There was a question earlier about SRR, as an example.
Mr. Roper, can you enlighten my confusion? The 420 consultant fee, is it for both properties or solely for Nethersoul?
Let me repeat. Nethersoul Place is far further down the wicket. And that's why we have had an approval for that engagement. We are not there with Hillcrest. They're two separate, they're going to be two separate engagements in relation to those items.
You're somewhat fidgeting. I'm asking, the 420 you mentioned for consultants, I'm asking, that's what I asked, if it's for Nethersoul Place or it's for both properties.
It is for, sorry, can I just come in? What we want to build at Nethersoul Place, which is a car park right there, is, let us say, similar tower to what we have here. Because right now we're not housing 1/3 of our staff. We can't. In fact, we have leased some property in the Scotia building to house some staff. So we do need housing for offices as well as car park. So what we're likely to end up with is a similar tower to what we have here, with more parking as well as more offices, with the intent of satisfying all of the staff requirements for the expanded BOJ mandate, which includes to come the whole of the Twin Peaks and SRR even recognizing that we currently can't house everybody at this time without those additional mandates. The cost for all of the technical work, which is the engineer and the architect and soil testing and everything that goes into building a tower, is estimated at 420 million Jamaican, and that is what we have put up to cabinet for approval, or not cabinet, but the procurement.
The infrastructure.
procurement process.
Would have gone to the infrastructure committee of cabinet, Governor,
Right.
through the PPC.
Right,
And we'd do a similar process for the BCC development.
right. Now the BCC development, it's really at the embryonic stage. What we need to do is to sit down here and say, what are those essential services that we can put up there, and how does that fit into the existing building which is there? It's a very substantial building, and it's 11,000 square feet, but it has to be retrofitted inside, because we're going to have a lot of computer equipment in there, and we have to have offices for specialized persons, and we have to have a facility to house a vault for currency distribution. So that is still at the planning stage. We don't have any idea of that cost as yet.
Thank you very much, Governor. Dashan has had his hand up for quite some time. Would you like to go ahead, Dashan?
Yeah, I was going to ask a couple of questions on that, but the governor clarified much of what I was going to ask on the relocation. But just one he never qualified, apart from the question I was going to ask, is how many more workers, employees are looking based on a projection in terms of filling up the office space? I was going to ask as well what exactly you were going to do up at Hillcrest, but you say you don't know as yet. Because I know Noel has mentioned moving some currency operations up there, but he said the consultant is to look at it to see what else they can move up there. Am I correct in interpreting what they said? That may not just be currency operations. Not Noel, George, sorry.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah. Noel is very happy that you confused the meeting. I'm joking. All right. So Dashan, we are talking about having a backup facility in the event that Nether Soul Place is not accessible. All right? The governor would have spoken about concerns due to earthquake, the fact that we're at the shoreline, and there can be storm surges. And these are very real threats that we've been experiencing in recent times. So, what happens when you don't have access to Nether Soul Place? There needs to be a facility where your mission critical functions, it won't be at full scale, but to an acceptable scale, can be done to carry us through that period when we are working to have access to Nether Soul restored. In relation to the staffing and why we're doing the expansion, just a number, I think we have about 350 parking spots. The bank's staff complement is about 730. We see the roads these days. I think after COVID-19, anybody who could afford a car seems to have bought a car and may have delayed decisions to acquire homes, I don't know. But we are seeing that in our situation. Much more staff members since the pandemic seem to be driving cars, and it is a major pain point. So the expansion will accommodate the parking that we need at Nether Soul Place. That's what Nether Soul is about. And it might not be the same height tower, Governor, but it certainly will have the character. The plan is that the new building will have the same character, and if I might use charm, of our existing structure here. And that really is the plan. We have to, in doing that construction, also be aware of the need for growth, whilst also taking into account that, as technology advances, we're going to, have hopefully some gains in terms of efficiency. So those are some of the things now that the consultant has to be aware of and be sensitive of in terms of doing the design and all those other things that the governor spoke of.
You don't mind telling
All right,
us
my
who the consultants?
sorry. Just 1 second. My substantive question. Oh, Durant, you're going to ask about this? If you're going to ask about this, then go ahead, because it's something different.
It's the consultants I'm asking. I'd love to know who they are.
I think the public will know soon enough. We'd want the consultant to be advised of the approval from cabinet, and then soon enough, I think everybody would know who that consultant is.
Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Roper.
very last question from me, Governor, before we go. The Bank of Jamaica has been pushing financial inclusion, launched JAMDEX as a digital currency. I don't know how much cheaper it is, the digital currency to produce than the physical currency. I don't know if Natalie wants to tell me any at all. I know she won't. But the substantive question I'm asking in terms of that is that I've been in a supermarket recently, and I took a photo where they are saying no phone tap payments will be accepted. And then you go to some place and they're saying even the tap the card payments, they don't want to accept it. They want you to insert your card and enter your PIN and stuff like that. In light of the push to use more digital means of payment, I don't know if you are getting anything from the public, but how do you view merchants saying we're not going to accept phone taps, with the commercial banks coming in with more phone tap payments like Apple Pay and Google Pay and stuff like that to make payments, but the merchants are not accepting it or saying they won't accept those sort of payments?
Let me see if I get it right. The merchants say for the credit card or debit cards that they can either tap or insert, they don't want persons to tap. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, some of them are saying they don't want any tap to pay with your debit or credit cards, but also.
So, as an investigative journalist, Dashan, did you find out why? No, I guess
I
not.
did. I want your part.
You're asking this. No, well, this is something that we can take up with the merchants as to why you're not taking. Tap is easier, I mean, but this is something that we can, check around with the merchants. I personally have not had that experience. I continue to tap as it goes on. With other payments, and you spoke about like Apple Pay and even JAMDEX, which would mainly be for the larger merchants, a QR code, which is going to be connecting from one phone to a dynamic QR code on a screen. That we are working on, and I don't see where that is going to be an issue in light of what you're saying happening now. That is going to be the means of payment using a QR code. And I'm sure for Apple Pay is on the phone again, so it must be from phone to a screen or something, so that will be acceptable. I know Scotia and other banks are looking at that as well. But I am not sure why the merchants would not want to tap. I know personally some persons don't want to tap, they prefer to insert and use their PIN. But I don't know that issue in terms of tap versus insert. And so...
the bigger issue is the phone tap. The phone tap. The phone tap like for JAMDEX and the others.
Yeah, JAMDEX is a QR code, so it is not really saying tapping, it's just the QR code comes up on the person's phone, on the screen for the merchant, and then the person will use their phone to scan that QR code. So it's not a tap, it's a scan.
Governor,
No, I don't know if I'm finished. I don't know if he's okay, Al.
No, man, I'm all right.
No, right. So for the merchants, the bigger merchants, it's going to be, well, for every merchant, it's going to be a QR code. It's just for the smaller merchants, it's going to be a phone-to-phone, more a static QR code. While for the larger merchants, it's going to be a dynamic one that comes up on a screen through the point-of-sale machines.
And this appears to be a merchant who used to accept it, because I'm looking at the thing, it says phone tap payments, this form of payment no longer acceptable. So they used to accept it before.
Phone tap? Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. We have to do some investigations. from our payment side to see. I don't know why they're not accepting it. But for phones, for us, for Jamaica, it's not going to be tap, it's going to be a scan on a QR code. All right? Durant.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yes, okay.
It's Dasha, not me.
Governor, as the year draws to a close, we see a lot of central banks reducing interest rates. What's your take overall, looking across the world, some of the major central banks, both in the stronger economies, lesser economies? What's your take as you close the year? What's your assessment of what's transpired over the last year? And if I may ask, also just post-COVID, the years post-COVID.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me about the future. But we spoke about that in the presentation, that we see the next couple of years as being pretty good years in respect of inflation, and that it should stay between our 4 to 6 corridor limits. There are risks, but if those risks don't materialize, I think we can say that in a gradual fashion, interest rates will have a tendency to decline. However, remember, we have to be watching many other issues, including the data. One of the issues, of course, is the competitiveness of the Jamaican dollar deposit rate versus that of US dollar deposit rate, or any other foreign currency deposit rate. So if the same trends that we see, which are favorable, are the trends that occur in the major trading partners, then I think you will see generally worldwide interest rates continue to come down. How far it will come down is not something that we can predict right now. And that is going to depend on what is the hard data that we are seeing, what are our experiences as rates notch down. So we'll have to take that almost a day at a time.
What's your assessment of, say, your contemporaries or other central bankers, how they dealt with the situation over the last year or so? I'm just trying to ascertain that. Not so much just Jamaica, but just, other central bankers. When you kind of read things, you look at things, what did impression that leave you?
Yeah, well, I mean, generally speaking, central banks have eased in the course of this year. Some started earlier than others. Some started and stopped. We started a little earlier than the Fed did, but we raised rates a little earlier than the Fed did too. But I think the general trend is that central banks would like to see interest rates come down. And to the extent that the data is showing that inflation is residing permanently within their corridors or to their targets, they will bring interest rates down. I know there are discussions in the US as to what is the neutral rate for the Fed going forward. And every country will have that discussion. And a neutral rate is not a static and permanent hurdle. It is something that is dynamic and which can move depending on what are the general economic circumstance in the particular domain as well as globally. So again, that is an issue that we take almost a day at a time. We look at in terms of what's the hard data telling us.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you for all the questions. Those questions that remain unanswered in the chat will be responded to via email. As this is the last quarterly press conference for the year, allow me to wish you all a happy holiday season and a Merry Christmas from Bank of Jamaica. Thank you.
And thank you for the tough questions. we couldn't be as effective in communicating if you didn't ask those tough questions. Have a great holiday. See you back in January, Robert? In January.